Hello, in this video I am going to show you how to put together the hovering witch hat, which is an SVG file from Simply Crafty SVGs. So here are the various pieces. We're going to put aside the main pieces for the hat. We're going to focus on the flower and a little inking. So here are the panels, and these are embossed panels that are already inked. And here's one that's not, and I'll show you what I did to get that effect, other than embossing it. So first thing I want to do with the flowers is to curl the petals, and it's just giving it a little bit of dimension, so once it gets on the hat, kind of looks like curved petals. There's no flower in particular, this is just a flower I made up, just to give a little bit of an extra oomph to the hat, so you could use whatever you have on hand. And I also inked these purple ones as well. So I used a little chalk ink, and you'll see that later on. And this is how I plan to layer the eyes. And now we'll move on to inking the last panel for the brim of the hat, which is an optional panel. Normally I would use something like this popcorn chalk ink, but I would needed a little bit more ink, and I'm kind of running out of the white ink there, so I just used a Recollections pigment ink and using the distress tool to apply it. So you can use really any stamp ink with that distress tool to blend it in. You just want to test it before you do it. And that's highlighting the embossing from the Kettlebug Haunted Damask embossing folder I used to emboss these panels. And then quickly, this is really quick, I just kind of went around the edges of the petals to give it kind of that gray-white tone on the edge to highlight it, so it didn't blend in with the back of the hat too much. But that's up to you. I just showing you some of the techniques I used, so I'm doing it rather quickly. I like the effect of inking because you can kind of distress the edges of anything with a little bit of ink. I like to use it for framing too, but you know, you don't have to be like anything. You don't have to, this is not like really artistic. It's just ink it until it looks good to you. And then we'll do the same with the purple spider flowers, except I'm using my preferred chalk ink, which is the Color Box chalk ink, which are cat's eye chalk inks. That's tongue twister, huh? And then the same thing here. I kind of already distressed it with a little ink around the edges and on top of the embossing. So I use a different embossing folder for that. That'll be listed below in the notes. And now that I have them distressed the way I want, of course nothing's perfect, like I said, I'm going to take the two biggest flowers and then I'm going to offset them a little so the petals are offset. You could do whatever looks good. If you wanted more flowers, you could layer more and cut more. That's up to you. And then just kind of, even though I curled them a little bit, I'm kind of flipping up here and there. And that's something you could do last too, before you put it on the hat. And that's paper I actually print and cut with the digital paper. So it was white on the back. Fortunately, you really can't see the white once you get it on there. So if you do want to do that, the back one maybe a little bit, but not the middle one. And then again, I offset it. And then added the very small one in the middle. But here I want to just pull some up here. And then just kind of squishing those up to the side there. Little teeny petals. Then I decided you could put like a rhinestone in the middle or something like that, but I wanted a little googly eye. That was, when I did this project, that was the one thing I wanted to put in the flower. It was one of my first visions of it. So now that's ready to go once we get to that part. Now we're going to work on the box that actually makes the hat hover. So I've already scored all the other ones and put that bottom panel. So you can see how they're scored. All the same size except for that bottom piece. So we're just going to add that, center that bottom panel Again, I already put the other ones on. And then we are going to assemble the box. So this box is twofold. You can put a little treat underneath the hat, but it also allows the hat to hover. And that's exactly what I was trying to do, is to have it appear like it was hovering. So we'll go ahead and add glue to these side tabs and then line up that right edge to the left tab fold. And then I would anchor that top piece first, and then once it's in place and it's not moving, go ahead and fold it over and line up that other side. You'll do that for all the other sides of this box. So we'll just continue to glue on each side. The biggest tip I can say is just make sure it's lined up at the top when you put each section on, and that you're lining that right edge to the left tab fold. And you could always run your finger over that edge if you wanted to make sure it was lined up correctly. And you can see always kind of stick my thumb over it to make sure that it's lined up best I can. And I am using Scotch quick dry tacky glue. I do kind of toggle between art glitter glue and tacky glue, but if I need a lot more flow of glue, I tend to use my tacky glue. So that's why I'm using it on this. And if you do like this project or any of my other ones, this one in particular, of course if you like it, if you give me a little thumbs up down there. If you like my other projects, subscribe and you'll be notified when I publish new projects. I would appreciate it. Thank you. So now we're getting towards the last panels. You can see I just kind of hold it until it's ready. You just don't want to go too quickly. You don't want to pull the other panels off. And the other thing is I always have a little wet paper towel handy to help with the leakage in between, just in case. Or I'll wipe it off with my finger and dab it on that towel. Here's a little towel here. There's always some time, at least 1 or 2 times in the video, where you're going to see me use too much glue. And this, just to close it up, same thing. The nice thing is you can reach in. It's always the hardest part to close a box like this. So just get one side anchored, and I kind of lightly get it in place first and then apply pressure just to make sure that it's in place before I apply pressure. So now we have those tabs on the bottom, so we're going to attach the bottom piece. So I'm just going to add glue to one tab. I'm going to line up that edge to just lined up with that tab fold. Apply a lot of pressure to get it anchored. So once we get it anchored in place, it'll be easier for us once we get glue on the other tabs to just fold it down. Another technique is to, if you don't mind seeing the tabs on the bottom, is to just put it inside and put glue, just kind of slide it inside, put glue on the other side of the tab, and just line up those edges on the inside. So it's up to you what you want to do. So you can see I'm kind of going around the edges. I'm making sure that the edges line up, and you kind of can squish it up a little bit just to get it lined up, and then apply pressure by rubbing lightly on those tabs. And then because it's an open box, we can either reach in with our hands, or you can use something like the wooden chopstick that I'm using, just to apply additional pressure to those tabs. And that's just the box piece. Now we'll work on the top of the hat. So you'll see that I put them in order from small to largest pieces. And we're going to carefully fold this little piece on the score lines. I want to sharp tip as much as I can. The reason I put this box together the way I did was because of the top. So I wanted it to be easier to put together, and normally I would put it in sections and glue it in sections. I know in different, like up and down, vertical, but this one, because of the way that top piece is, I wanted to make sure we got a good tip. So we're just going ahead and folding all these tabs and folding it on the score lines. So I know it's hard to see with black, so I'm trying to make sure that I can zoom in and zoom out where I need to. But first things, I would just score it, or fold it, I'm sorry, on the score lines, just to get it ready. And make sure they're good and crisp. And it might be hard with if you're using something like the score tool for the maker, but if you cut them, they'll be easier to fold. So now I'm using my art glitter glue. And what I like to do with this top piece is I want to glue, you want to do 1 or 2 tabs. Like 1 tab was actually easier than 2. But I can't go back and retape this. I mean, I do voiceovers. I'm transparent about that. But you want to go ahead and match up. Just make sure it's in the right place before you glue it. The seams are always going to be in the same place for this. So I made all the seams in the curved part underneath. The part that curves underneath, I should say. So once we get that anchored, you can see that I have it glued to 2 tabs. This is where you have to look carefully. I'm going to fold it over. And on the back piece, it's kind of going to, that tab should fold up. I know it's not going to be really easy to see, but it's going to fold up because it's going to, as it's curving, if you look at the hat, it kind of folds under. Kind of as it folds, the tip goes up, but then it kind of, we want a valley fold there. I'm hoping you're understanding me because I'm trying to show you in the pictures. But I know it's kind of dark. So hopefully you can see that, how it's a valley fold. So if you need to, I would either pause it or reverse it so you can look at it again. And then we'll glue the remaining ones. So the same thing with the other end on that top. We're gonna, that last tab will be folded upwards. So I'm just carefully lining each tab up. This is pretty much the only piece. So this is the hardest piece of all of them. So take the time. If for some reason you need to recut it out, at least it's a teeny piece. So it's really not as bad as I'm making it to be, but I just want to make sure you understand what it looks like. So hopefully it's light enough for you to see. So once we have those in place, we're going to go ahead and glue this really skinny tab at the top. So this is where the wooden chopstick comes in handy. So I'm just lining it up there, and I can't get my finger all the way up to that tip. So I just want to line it up. So I'm lining that edge up to the tab fold. Then I'm going to reach in and apply pressure against that chopstick. So that chopstick helps me get the pressure I need against that tab on the inside. And now you can see what I meant about the folding that tab back. Then we have this other tab here. So now you can't see it, but there's another tab on the inside. There he goes, right there. I'm going to go ahead and line that up. So now we have 2 sections of the top of the hat put together. I promise you that was probably the hardest part of the whole project. So now, again, where the seam is always going to be in, I want to say the back part, but in the curved area. So again, I'm going to anchor one tab, and just make sure you have the right tab. Just count them over. So you see the seam's always going to meet up on that side. So I'm just folding it over to make sure that it folds over okay. So you can do that as well. So using my little fine tip applicator, I'm going to glue the next two. Now if you want to do more than two, of course you're welcome to do that. I like to get the first one in place, and then if I have to angle the next one, it's not pulling the other one. So you need to hold those tabs as long as you need to for the glue that you're using. I do like art glitter glue because it gives me a little wiggle room, but it does glue within a couple moments. The reason I don't use Scotch Quick Dry in a fine tip applicator, I used to, but it tends to, I haven't found a really good fine tip applicator for it yet. So you can see I just kind of tucked in that last tab underneath to get it ready to glue once we get these other tabs together. But also art glitter glue is kind of a thinner glue, so it's, like I said, the Scotch Quick Dry has got a really thick consistency to it, but I do like it for larger tabs. So I'm just reaching in to get that last tab and lining up that edge to the tab fold there. So I lied, the third one's a little bit, but see, it gets easier as it gets bigger. It gets easier. But anything you do curved with paper is going to be a little bit more of a challenge because of the way we have to put it together. So you also want to be careful with glue because you don't want glue on that black piece. I do have I included with the file some extra panels if you wanted to try to cut panels to put on the side of the actual hat. But that's up to you whether you want to use them. I did not do that. It was just something, it's easy for me to do while I'm making the file, so I provided that within the file just in case somebody wants it. So this time I'm starting from the seam, and I'm starting with that first tab. And I'm just going to work my way around. So the biggest thing here is just make sure that that's lined up into the section. Again, you're always going to start for this one, not always, but I was starting in the middle, but with this big piece it was easier to start from the seam, which is that inside curved area. And then once that's anchored, we'll go around carefully. And I was just making sure that I had it in place before I applied pressure. If you don't have that first tab lined up, it could go a little wonky on you, but most likely nobody would really notice it that much as long as you weren't far off. Then it's handy because I could apply pressure against the table. As it gets more round, you can't do that, but take advantage of it as you can. So I'm going to go ahead and add glue to the rest of the tabs, then work my way around. And half the battle here is just getting your hands in the right angle to get in, because I'm trying to reach in at the same time and apply pressure as I line up those tabs. I'm going to fold that tab in before I glue that long side tab in before I glue the last tab. So that just completes the top, other than this tab we have to glue. Just carefully reach in with my little fine tip applicator. The nice thing is if I do get a little glue on the seam, I am going to ink it with the white pigment ink, so that does help hide, quote unquote, some of your glue blemishes. If they show. Some glue shows more than others. So now that that's done, we're going to work on the brim here. So I'm just kind of curling it a little bit because it curls down. I could have made it one piece, but if I made it one piece, it would be flat across. And the way that I made it, it curves down a little bit so it hides the holder, the box. So you can't even tell the box is there. And you can see I inked the edges already with a little bit of white pigment ink. And now I'm going to add these panels. So you do not have to add these panels. This is optional. The way these fit, so I'm going to add glue on the back. We want to line it up to, so fold up that tab right there, and you want to line it up into that section so that top side should line up perfectly with the tab fold. And we also want it to line up on the right hand side, so you can see if you want to dry fit them, you can see how it works. So that was just a little bit off. And the other thing to note is that it doesn't go all the way to the edge. There's going to be a little thin piece of the brim that you're going to be able to see from the end if you use these panels. And what I like about this, it gives it a little bit more texture. But I couldn't get one piece because I needed pieces that were sized to fit in the standard embossing folders, which are usually what, 4x6 or something to that effect, and 5x7, I believe. So I wanted them small enough to be able to fit into an embossing folder. You could use pattern paper, of course, but the whole reason I actually did this was to get an embossing folder effect. So you can see I'm just going around and lining them up, and you see that the very edge is showing still. But the hat, I have made the hat without the panels, and it looks just fine, so you could skip this part. And if you have never used embossing folders, it's one of my favorite things. It just gives it dimension, and then with added a little inking on the top, with especially with black, it just gives it a cool effect. In person, you kind of feel that dimension. You can just, that dimension kind of pops out at you. So I could speed this up, but the reason I'm not is just so you can see how carefully I'm placing each panel, and that it will fold over like that once we're done. I was afraid because I had a little curve on it that these would come apart. So just make sure you have glue towards the right and left edges, because you're kind of going to curve it down. It's going to curve down once we get it together, glued with that little side tab. Then one more. And if there's a little gap at the end, I mean, hopefully there's not, but there's always a possibility. That's where your seam is. So I tend to put the seams in a place where I think it's appropriate. So you'll see once I put the top on. Now we'll go ahead and take it and line that up like that. You don't really have to do too much folding on that tab. It's just a light score just so you know where to glue. And then you're going to go ahead and line that up. So with the other hats that I've done, it's just a circle, or just one cutout, but like I said, this one has a little curve in it, so it curves down. It's very slight, but it's the look I wanted. So that's the tab. And then when I cleaned it off, I took off some of the white ink, so I just went over and added it back. Just pigment ink does take a while to dry, so it could get on your hands. And that's what it looks like on the inside, little curve. And this is how the hat can go on. Either it's symmetrical, so it can be situated in any way. It doesn't have to line up that way. You want to put the seam wherever you want to, and I'm going to put it on the what I call the back of the hat, opposite of where I'm going to put the flower. So as I display it, I won't see that. I mean, it's not glaring, but that's how I handle that seam. So with each piece, you can see I already inked the top piece. So I pre-inked it before I put any of the embellishments on. So we're going to go ahead and add glue to one tab and carefully place it. So we're just gluing it to that inside section. And as you hear me on other sections, we're going to anchor it. So once it's good and anchored, we can go ahead and glue on the other tabs. So you can go ahead and fold it back carefully. So you could do it from the inside, but this is the easier way to glue the tabs. You don't want to pull it back before it's dry though. So I'm just trying to get in the right angle. And whenever I do something like a hexagon or a square, I like to glue the opposite tab first of the first one that I anchored. And the reason I do that, it helps me put it in place so it doesn't get wonky. If you go just around, sometimes it kind of gets weird and offset a little bit. So if I glue the opposite one first, so I'm doing the one across from the first one that I anchored. So I'm reaching in and applying pressure. Then that puts it in place, and it'll be easier for me to fold over these remaining tabs and get them in place. So now I'm going around and folding those other tabs inward, and you can see I'm applying pressure on the outside as well. And you want to double check. I'm not looking inside, so you do want to double check to make sure you got all the tabs. And I had a little bit of glue there. Trying to keep glue off the rim, because if somebody lifted it up, they'd be able to see it. But it's not that critical. So that puts the remainder of the hat together. What's left is really just embellishing it and adding the rim, the hat panels. So you can see that just fits right in there and hovers it off the table. So now we have this panel that we can put on. So there's a couple ways you can put this on. It is a little bit thicker in the middle. So if you want the thicker part towards where you're looking at, you kind of want to angle that way. The other thing is you can line it up with the seam of the hat if you just want the seams in the same place. You could, so the thing is that you could close it. Anyways, you want to just kind of fit where it's going to go. So I'm just going to anchor it with that one tab. You want to make sure it's in the right place, so you kind of want to wiggle around and fold it over to make sure that it matches up, so you can see it's lifted a little bit. And then we can add glue, a little bit of line of glue around the middle of it and the end to finish it off. You just want to be careful when you're doing this not to get to have it fold over and hit the top of the hat, which I almost had done like that. The other way to put this on is to just glue the end over there's a little tab at the end to glue it together before you put it on, and just slide it down and then add a little dab of glue to get it in place. And you wouldn't really have to glue it. It'll stop in place. So that's up to you how you want to do that. There's different techniques. But I did match up the seam of that hat band to the seam on the brim. And I didn't show you the best way to put this on, I realize. And the last thing will be just placement of your embellishments. So I did add a little bit more than just the flower eye. I added some cobwebs from, I went to a dollar store in the US here and found some black flowers with black leaves, and I took those leaves and added it to the flower that I made and added the spider and cobwebs with a little bit of black embellishment there. And you can see this just sits underneath the hat to lift it up and have that hovering effect. It was a fun project. I finally made a witch's hat, and I hope others enjoy it as well. And I thank you so much for watching.